countdown is on for that big bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Narendra Modi and American President Donald Trump. Ahead of this, I'm joined on this broadcast by Lisa Curtis, Senior Fellow and Director at the India-Pacific Security Program at the Center for a New American Society. Also, she's served in the Donald Trump administration the first time round as Senior Director for South and Central Asia in the National Security Council between 2017 and 2021. So she's someone who understands the Donald Trump worldview and the current ecosystem better than most. And she's an India expert. So Lisa Curtis, thank you, and it's fantastic to have you with us on the News Track.
Thank you for having me.
I want to start by getting you to explain, given all your deep insights into what's happening in DC at this moment, your best sense of the most likely probable outcome in this first Modi-Trump bilateral after President Trump became president again.
Well, I think the meeting should go well. President Trump and Prime Minister Modi really have a good chemistry. They have a history, they know each other, they've met many times in the past, and I think they genuinely respect each other. And so I expect the meeting to go well. Of course, there are questions about India's high tariffs. President Trump has raised this issue already. He's been clear that it's important to him that India reduce the tariffs on U.S. exports to India. He wants to see the trade deficit, the U.S. trade deficit with India reduced. So there is an expectation that Modi is coming with some deliverables, that he will announce some reductions in tariffs, that he may announce that India is going to import more oil and gas from the United States to reduce that trade deficit. So I do expect it to be a warm meeting, but there's also going to be questions raised and some difficult issues that they will have to manage.
President Trump put out a post on Truth Social. I have it before me. News conference on reciprocal tariffs today at 1 p.m. at the Oval Office. Make America Great Again. A lot of concern in India about whether India, like Canada, like Mexico, like China, will be amongst the countries targeted. President Trump in the past has called India a tariff king, trade abuser, etc. So in your sense of where India stands in the list of Trump targets on the issue of tariff, do you think India could be impacted in this press conference that happened in the afternoon?
Well, possibly. And I think, Trump has already announced 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. And this directly impacts India. 1/5 of, the exports from India to the United States involve steel and aluminum. So already, I think Trump has indicated that their trade is going to be impacted. So I think the best thing the two leaders could do is announce that they are starting fast-track trade negotiations. And this would indicate that both sides want to come to some kind of a deal. And this would be one of the best outcomes, I think, from today's meeting, because it's clear that things are going to have to change, that President Trump is going to want India to reduce its tariffs. And let's face it,
a lot of that already happened in the budget. A lot of the peak tariffs, for example, on those big 1600cc plus motorcycles like the Harleys, which are a big attack target for Donald Trump in the last term, have been dealt with in the finance minister's budget already, Lisa, as you know.
Well, this will help a little bit, particularly the reduction in tariffs on the high-end motorcycles, because as you said, this will open the way for the U.S. to export more Harley-Davidson motorcycles, which is important. This is something that's important to Trump, so that will help a little bit. But frankly, I don't think that the reductions in tariffs that India has already taken will be enough to satisfy Trump. This is a different administration than the first time around. I think there will be less patience with a failure to achieve a good deal from India. And so this is going to be something that's very important. It's not like the first Trump administration where the failure to achieve a trade deal really did not impact the larger strategic relationship in a significant way. I think this time around there is a greater expectation that India will move more toward the United States on these trade negotiations.
Yep.
And so I think the pressure is really on India now.
Sure, but since the time you've started, you've spoken a lot about what America wants, very little about what India wants, and that to many Indians, Lisa, with respect, sounds like a very transactional relationship. And India, like many other countries, have optionality. There's already been a thaw with China. A lot of people in DC would like to use India or see India as a counterbalance to China's desire to dominate the Asia-Pacific region. If it gets so transactional with the Trump administration at some point in time, there could likely be a pushback from India as well.
Well, I think, this is a different administration. President Trump has indicated that, his political comeback has given him a lot of confidence in how he's dealing on the international stage. And this is, something that is a reality that we're facing. But I do think that the two nations, really the underpinning for the U.S.-India strategic partnership is their mutual interest in competing with China, in meeting the challenges from China, in deterring Chinese aggression. India and China have made progress on their border dispute, and they have reduced tensions, but there is still that threat there for India with regard to its border with China, the contested border with China. So this is an area where the United States and India come together and they have a mutual interest. So I think given that mutual interest, that will help, that will be like the glue that will keep the two countries, finding ways to cooperate. I think that we can count on that mutual strategic interest.
No, but the point that I was making was about other countries building optionality. We're seeing that in Europe. We're seeing that among Canada and Mexico as well, and we potentially could see that with India, where everybody says America is then too transactional, too unreliable, too mercurial a country to actually, vest yourself fully with. And therefore, while of course you do the trapeze, the diplomatic trapeze with the Donald Trump administration, you don't go all in. That you basically start viewing what should be seen as a strategic ally as someone who can turn his back at you at any time.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, look, in the case of Canada, when Trump threatened, major tariffs against Canada, Canada indicated it would retaliate in ways that, were detrimental to the United States. So I think, if countries, do stand up and, show that they have options, then, that will compel the Trump administration to think about some of the things that it's trying to do. So I think, India has never been shy about maintaining its strategic autonomy and being very clear that it wanted to keep its strategic options open. So I think that you're right, that India would be able to exercise those options. I'm just simply relating what I have seen thus far,
Sure.
the first 3 weeks of the Trump administration. And I think, this is a risk that Prime Minister Modi has decided to take, to visit the Trump administration early amidst all the chaos that we are seeing in this first few weeks of the Trump administration. Now, the Japanese Prime Minister was able to navigate that, and there was a very good meeting that happened between the Japanese Prime Minister and President Trump last Friday. And, perhaps the Modi government is hoping for a similar kind of meeting and hoping that despite the trade friction, that they will be able to spotlight the broader strategic underpinnings of the relationship and the interest by both countries to counter China, to stand up to China, to focus on things like diversifying supply chains so that they can reduce overall dependency on China. To the extent they can also focus on these issues, I think that will help to cushion the blow of the trade differences between the two countries.
There was a telephonic conversation between Donald Trump and the Russian President Vladimir Putin, What do you anticipate emerging from that conversation? Because President Trump promised that the war would end. We've heard his defense secretary talk about how Ukraine needn't be a member of NATO. Where do you think Russia and Ukraine are heading from the lens of the Trump administration?
Well, Trump was very clear that he wanted to put a great deal of effort into trying to end the war and start negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. But I think, he needs to do this in a way that will not, make it possible for Russia to exercise similar aggression a couple of years down the road. And what that means is it means Ukraine needs some security guarantees. So, if NATO membership is not going to be on the table, the question is, what will be on the table? How do you ensure Russia is not going to invade Ukraine again in a year or two down the road? Because that certainly would reflect negatively on President Trump. And I think he is concerned about his legacy. He wants a legacy of being a peacemaker. So, he has to ensure that he's coming at this from a strong position and that he is not ending the war in a way that makes America look weak or that, Russia looks emboldened and in a position where it will invade Ukraine again a couple of years down the road.
You were part of the first Trump administration, Lisa Curtis. From your lens, what differences are you seeing in the way the first administration acted and behaved with the way that Donald Trump and his team have acted in the past few weeks that they've been in charge?
Well, I think one of the biggest differences was the cut to U.S. foreign aid. I think it was understandable that there would be some kind of review of foreign assistance, maybe some programs cut that didn't fit with the Trump administration's priorities and agenda. That's understandable. But I think the way in which the foreign assistance was completely stopped and ended on all fronts, and the firing of 10,000 U.S. aid officials, this has really been quite shocking. And I think it shows a contradiction within the Trump administration, because on the one hand, I think President Trump believes in U.S. global power. He wants the U.S. to be the most influential country. But with cutting off foreign assistance, what he's really doing is taking away one of the most important tools for U.S. foreign policy and national security. And this is soft power. Soft power is important for building global relationships, for building U.S. influence in these countries. And, China, this is like a gift to China. China's ready to step in and fill the vacuum that the U.S. is creating by withdrawing all foreign assistance across the globe. So I think this is one of the major differences that I see between the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration. A willingness to really, let go of a very important policy tool that is useful in countering Chinese influence and useful in the competition with China. So okay. I'm disappointed to see that.
Lastly, there's also a meeting with Elon Musk. We saw Musk and his child at the Oval Office in that long conversation they had with journalists. What's your sense of the Musk-Modi meet, given that Elon Musk has suggested he wants to invest in India, whether it's through Starlink, bring Tesla in, not done this, announced a visit, cancelled that, went to China. So there's a past build-up to this meeting, but no tangible outcome so far.
Well, I think you're talking about Elon Musk and his relationship to China and investments there. And I think, this is going to be interesting because, how much will this influence the U.S. strategy toward China? I think it remains a question. But again, I would just emphasize that the U.S.-India relationship has a strategic logic to it that, many in the Trump administration understand. Secretary of State Rubio National Security Advisor Waltz. These are people who supported the U.S.-India relationship when they were in the U.S. legislature. They continue to support strong U.S.-India relations. Secretary of State Rubio, one of his first meetings was with his Indian counterpart, the day that he took office, January 21st, and holding a Quad meeting that included India, of course. So I think that there is a strong strategic logic to the India-U.S. relationship, and that no matter what happens between the U.S. and China, maybe there will be trade negotiations, some softening of the approach to China from President Trump, but still the fundamental strategic competition with China and the U.S. remains, and the fact that India is a critical country in supporting a free and open Indo-Pacific and acting as a counterbalance to China in this vital region, that does not change.
Lisa Curtis, there are very few people who can give a sense of what's happening within the Trump administration, good, bad, and ugly, in quite the way that you can, for being candid and for taking out time on a day when there are a lot of eyes on what happens in this meeting between Modi and Trump. Thank you very much. I hope to come back to you for more once the meetings are over and once we know what actually came from them. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.